apologies, Councillor Barrett. Can you hear okay now?
I can now, yes, thank you. That's the first
Yeah,
I've heard.
Okay, well, you've not missed anything for what it's worth, but unless you have any declarations of interest, of course, I should clarify that.
I have no declarations of interest. Thank you very much, Convener.
Not at all. Thanks, Councillor Barrett. If we can agree the minute of the meeting of Learning and Families, 24th August. Thank you. And also we need to agree the minute of the meeting of the Children, Young People and Families Partnership of 17th June. Thank you. And if we can note the outstanding business statement, unless anybody, Councillor Ahern, Bailey Ahern.
Yeah, I've got a question on the minutes. There's no minutes there for the Educational Trust Committee that took part on the 5th of September.
Yeah, I can clarify that, Bailey Ahern. That's simply because you probably won't see them again. You won't see them come up for a little while because you get approved by the Educational Trust themselves before coming to this committee for noting. So it's the same with the, you know, it's with the sort of Children, Young People and Families Partnership, for example. That's, we've had a meeting in between that, so that's the minute from the meeting 2 back that's been approved by that group. So yeah, that's just where it is with that basically.
Thanks for that clarity.
Thank you, Councillor Ahern. If we can note the outstanding business statement, unless anybody has any comments or questions on that, we'll move straight on to paper 5, which is the statutory consultation of Abernight Primary School, and that report will be introduced by our Executive Director, Education and Children's Services, Sheena Devlin.
Thank you very much, Convener. By way of introduction, I would like to say that in May 2021, the then Lifelong Learning Committee considered the options appraisal for Abernight Primary School. It was agreed that a statutory consultation was to be undertaken to allow consideration to be given to amending the catchment area for Abernight Primary to include the area north of the A90, which is currently within the catchment area for Instewr Primary School. The outcome and findings from the consultation have now been reported and published in the consultation report, along with Education Scotland's report. The report from Education Scotland acknowledges that the Council's proposal has potential educational benefits for pupils. This includes the potential for a larger number and wider range of peers in Abernight Primary School, which may then allow children to access a learning environment where there may be groups of learners at all stages, providing a better age and gender balance. The Council's proposals have generally been supported by those stakeholders who responded to the consultation, and the majority of those consulted have raised no issues or opposition to the proposals. The report prepared demonstrates that we've put in place a robust approach in meeting our legislative requirements and have fully considered the potential educational benefits for current and possible future pupils. Today, this committee is being asked to consider and approve the proposal to amend the catchment for Abernight Primary School to therefore include the area north of the A90, currently within Instewr Primary School catchment area, with effect from August 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Have we any questions on this report, please? Councillor Shars.
Thank you, Convener. I've actually got a number of questions. Do you want me to just hit you with them, or?
Yeah, just go for it.
Okay. Again, as with previous consultations, notable that hundreds of letters were sent out and only a very small number of people who actually responded, which is par for the course, unfortunately, with these type of consultations. But I'd be interested to know, you know, for moving into the future, if we've got any alternative ways of engaging with key stakeholders. Do you just want all the questions in one go, Sheena, or?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. Do we know how many preschool age children there are in the proposed new catchment area? Do we have any future role projections based on the change to the catchment? Very importantly, based on previous schools that were part of the previous review, can we be assured that the principle of no detriment to Inchture Primary School is being upheld as part of this? I'm confident from the paper that it is, but I just think it's important that that's noted at committee. And again, I think it was quite clear in the paper, but just to get confirmation to parents who raised concerns regarding placing requests to Inchture Primary who might be within the new catchment, that there wouldn't be any barriers in terms of projected roles for Inchture because of the house building that's going on in and around the village.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. Karen, do you want to address one or two of these points, please? Karen Robertson.
Thank you. Firstly, in relation to the engagement, in relation to engaging with parents, whilst we did send out a vast number of letters to parents with a small response, we had numerous ways in which parents could respond back to us, whether that was in writing, by email, with an online forum, by attending a meeting, but we're more than happy to look at any alternative ways or alternative mechanisms to do that in the future. In relation to the future role projections and the preschool information, I don't have today information about preschool figures, Councillor Shires, but the future role projections, if the committee is minded this afternoon to approve the recommendation, we will then need to do some work with the directly affected parents, because we've given a commitment that the choice will be for those parents in the affected catchment area, but whether they will seek to move their children or not. So the future role projections will be maybe amended based on the choices of parents, but we're looking at a number of 7 in the current arrangement, which then leads on to the no detriment for Inchture. So if there were to be a change, then it's a very small number of children that we are talking about that wouldn't have an impact on the arrangements at Inchture as they currently operate.
Thank you, Karen. Just before you respond, Councillor Shires, the only thing I'd like to add, because point noted about sometimes the small number of parents that do actually engage. I did go out to Inchture during the consultation. The ones that did engage were very engaging and, you know, did involve themselves in it. I think it was really helpful. And I think your point about trying to, it is true that often there's a compromise between trying to encourage the role at Abernight and detriment to Inchture, and I think our officers have tried to compromise appropriately, if that's the right way to put it. I do think there is a legitimate endeavour to help the Abernight role without endangering anything involving parents at Inchture, but inevitably there may at some point be some compromise to be had in that. But I don't know if you want to add anything further to what you've heard.
Thank you. I'll maybe follow up in comments with some further comments on that. Yeah, it's just grateful to officers. I know how much work goes into these statutory consultations, and the knowledge, the encyclopedic knowledge that Karen has on this subject in particular is much appreciated. I think it's just that point that, you know, parents of preschool children who don't engage in the process, and then when it comes to going to primary school, that, you know, there's maybe a change that they weren't aware of. But, you know, I know that officers do all they can in the circumstances. I just wonder if we're maybe needing to be more, I don't know, creative in the way that we engage with communities on these really important issues.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. Points noted, genuinely. Thank you for that. If there are no more questions, I will move the report. Councillor Barrett, my apologies, I'm not paying attention to my chat function, so you have a question.
Thank you, Convener. It applies to the Bertha Park report as well. I noticed that looking at the consultation with the children, there didn't seem to be any adverse comments, but a minority of the children voted against the proposals, and I just wondered if there was any kind of knowledge about what were their reasons for voting against, apart from perhaps not being comfortable with change, and whether there was anything could be done to address their concerns, because they weren't specified in the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Barrett. I think some of the concerns were addressed at the consultation actually, but I might ask Karen just to comment on it again, if that's okay, Karen.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett, the consultation that was undertaken with the pupils for Abernight P1 to P5 pupils and for Bertha Park P1 to P3 pupils was an age appropriate consultation exercise. So the young people were not asked to provide reasons for agreeing. The work in how that is delivered is to ensure they have an understanding of what the proposal is, that they have an opportunity to ask questions. They did their votes in secret and were not asked to qualify why they agreed or did not agree. And we do try to tailor that consultation with young people dependent on the age and stage of the young people that we're working with for all the different consultations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. If there are no more questions, I will move the report, and in doing so, I just want to thank officers because, as Councillor Shires suggests, it is hard work, not least Karen Robertson for her work on it. Thank you. I do think this is a good report. I think it is a genuine attempt to help Abernight without detrimenting Insture, so I'm delighted to move this report, and I'll ask Councillor Carr to second it.
I'll second the report.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. I know Councillor Massey has a comment, and if anybody else does, if you either wave your hand at me or stick a C in the box, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Convener. I believe the proposal to amend the Abernight School catchment area is a good option. An extensive consultation process is undertaken and completed. 370 letters issued, a public meeting was held, and an online form generated. And the children from both Abernight and Insture primary schools being given the opportunity to voice their opinions and concerns. The concerns of the parents were addressed by our council colleagues, and overall the consensus was in support to extend the Abernight catchment area. Education Scotland that has been said, agree that there are potential educational benefits in the proposal to amend the catchment area of Abernight, and agree with the views of the stakeholders that the proposals being potentially longer term benefits to Abernight Primary School with minimum impact to Insture Primary School. Given the previous periods of uncertainty around the future of Abernight School, the measures to secure a sustainable future role are welcome. The proposal benefits both Abernight and Insture primary schools. I support the recommendations contained within the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Massey. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Convener. Very briefly, just welcome this report and again, thank the officers for the considerable amount of work that goes into drawing these up and the public consultation. This has been a long process for the communities involved, and I think the commitment that there's no detriment in any of this work to the school community around Insture while supporting that of Abernight is really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Convener. Just to sort of reflect on and echo Councillor Shire's comments around this, has obviously been a long process for the community, and it is nice to have reached a conclusion point for them. So I think that they can all have certainty going forward. I think this is a very positive outcome, and I'm very supportive of the report, and thanks to officers for the extensive work that has been done over a long period of time now at this point, and I think our officers know the community very, very well at this point, which is a real positive thing, because it means they can interpret a lot of what the community's feelings on matters have been. So I'm very supportive of the recommendation. As Councillor Shire says, I think the fact that there isn't a detriment to Insture is very positive, but I think it will help ensure Abernight has that sustainable school role going forward, which is very important, and very much welcome the report, and wish Abernight and Insture very best going forward.
Thanks very much for those comments, Provost, which is what I should have called you a minute ago. My apologies. If everybody's agreed, if everybody's happy, we'll just agree the report. Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you. We'll move on to paper 6, which is the statutory consultation around the new primary school at Bertha Park, which will also be introduced by our Executive Director.
Thank you, Convener. In August 2021, the then Lifelong Learning Committee considered the options appraisal for a new primary school at Bertha Park. It was agreed that statutory consultation was to be undertaken to allow consideration to be given to establishing a new primary school and the new catchment areas and associated changes as required by the Schools Consultation Scotland Act 2010. The outcome and findings from the consultation have now been reported and published in the consultation report, along with Education Scotland's report. The report from Education Scotland acknowledges that the Council's proposal has clear educational benefits for the pupils. This includes providing a high-quality learning environment with a purpose-built design which has the potential to offer flexible learning and social spaces. The value of the new school to the community is also recognised, as well as the benefits of an additional nursery and an intensive support provision. The Council's proposals have generally been supported by those stakeholders who responded to the consultation, and the majority of those consulted have raised no issues or opposition to the proposal. The report prepared demonstrates that we've put in place a robust approach in meeting our legislative requirements and have fully considered the potential educational benefits. Today, this committee is being asked to consider and approve the proposal to establish a new primary school at Bertha Park, the establishment of a catchment area for the new primary school and directly affected schools, along with the associated arrangements required. There are a number of officers here today, Convener, who'd be able to answer any questions the committee has. Thank you.
Thank you again, Sheena. Do we have any questions on this report? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Convener. I have two questions. I note that funding's been allocated for in the Composite Capital Programme for the new school, and I just wanted to check how confident are we about the design and construction timetables and that we have enough money? I take it that at this meeting we're agreeing in principle that we want to go ahead with the school, but I just wondering how much there is in the background at the moment. Thank you. And do you want the other question is about on page 80, 8.2, what's being done about improved cycle routes to aid safer journeys, which parents were asking for, and also to support active travel for children to attend the school, and that would apply to the Bertha Park as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Barrett. I'll ask Brian Reid, who I think's online for the first point. Brian's there actually, just looked very smarter than he usually does, so I didn't recognise him, so probably shouldn't say that in public. But Brian, if you can give me an answer, please, that would be.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, with regard to the first question, then absolutely we're as confident as we can be, as reasonably be at this time with regards to the timescales. They are in line with similar projects that we have undertaken. So yes, we're confident in the timescales.
Thanks, Brian. Karen, I don't know if you're able to address the sustainable travel part of Councillor Barrett's question, please.
Thank you, Convener. Councillor Barrett, as we do with any new build schools and any changes that we'll be making to catchment areas, we will be undertaking work with those school communities about school travel planning for when the new school opens and what the changes on the catchment areas would have for families living within those areas. We work very closely with our colleagues in the road safety team as part of the school travel planning, and also work with them in terms of things like the core footpath network, etc. So we would be anticipating that we would continue to undertake that work in the lead up to the new school opening and the catchment areas changing. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Just if I could just follow up just to ask about the funding, are we reasonably confident we've got enough set aside for this?
Brian?
Yes, thank you. Yes, any funding queries, Councillor Barrett, will be considered through the Finance and Resources Committee. We did set aside funding earlier this year for the project in line with all the forecasts at that time. But any further cost updates or reviews will be done through the Finance and Resources Committee. I don't have any further information on that at this point.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Shires?
Thank you, Convener. My question is around the important aspects of transition. We know that with other schools that have been built, that's kind of started early, and the involvement of the wider school community and the user reference group, and just wondering about timescale for that, and good luck with the pupil voice, because we know that they like to be heard, as we witnessed down at Riverside. So just wondering if there's details about timescales for all of that.
Karen Robertson? Brian again, sorry. Thanks, Brian.
No problem. Yes, Councillor Shires. Yeah, absolutely. We don't have an exact timescale for that. We're just at the point now of a new project request, establishing the design team, procurement team and so forth. We'll then absolutely deliver a programme in line with what we've done on our projects. We'll follow the same principles. We have already, though, actually been out with the Children's Voice already, speaking to potential pupils for Bertha Park and other pupils who've lived through new projects in new primary schools. So one of my colleagues, the project manager, has been doing extensive work on that already with the children, but absolutely we'll be out to these voices. We've established who those pupils are at the moment. It'll be very much part of the process.
Thanks, Brian. Councillor Stewart?
Thank you, Convener. I guess it's really just a question prompted by Councillor Barrett's about the funding arrangements. Why was the original recommendation not just to build an all-through school and attach a primary school to Bertha Park, given that there would have obviously been a projected need for one?
Greg, I don't know if you've any, that's maybe unfair of you to comment on that. I don't know.
So I'll jump in here, it's fine. It's obviously before my time with regards to the exact strategic decisions and how they were taken at the point and how we'd worked through, but I know there's been very much a master plan with how Bertha Park was taken forward, how the house building, how the numbers would stack up, and there was obviously a very big timing difference. Like the secondary school was delivered back in 2018 and we're now looking at 2026 for delivering the primary school. So I think there's significant challenges there around, and indeed there was significance about the government funding, how that was brought forward for the secondary schools. So I think it was at the time the timings would just not allow to an all through at that point.
Thanks, Brian. I think that's a very fair question, Councillor Stewart. I'm not entirely sure we've answered it, but I think thanks to Brian for doing his best to do that. Thank you. If there are no more questions, again, I will just go straight into moving the report. And in doing so, again, I just want to thank officers and Karen Robertson again. I know there was a lot of work. The consultations again that I attended out at Bertha Park were really good and really engaging. So thanks for that. But also thanks to Councillor Shires, actually, because I know as convener, your passion was genuine for it. So I think we need to recognise that today as well. So, but this is a good news story and I'm very happy to formally move this report. Thank you. And
I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Do we have any comments on the report? Councillor Barrett, please.
Thank you, Convener. I'd just like to add my thanks to Karen Robertson and the teams, Karen Dawson and the teams for everything, and all the officers who've been involved in this very substantial consultation and report, and also the very sensible and sensitive approach that's been taken to the concerns of the pupils and the families. I also note and welcome the commitment to continue engaging with the affected pupils and the families as the plans are being developed, and that is warmly welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett, for those very appropriate words. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you for your comments earlier. Our group warmly welcome this report and the work of officers as has been said, which has gone into it. This is a very positive outcome for the communities across the north of Perth, the new community at Bertha Park, the new school community which has grown up around Bertha Park High School, and also the existing community of Rutherfield Primary School. When this was first discussed at Lifelong Learning Committee, there were concerns raised in some quarters, but it's clear in this paper that a very positive outcome is now in place, and we can look forward to a new primary school at Bertha Park and the positive contribution it will make to the lives of the children and families in the local area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. You're right. I think I was certainly guilty of not really appreciating how quick these houses would go up, and that's certainly noted. I'm delighted that we're moving forward with it, but thank you for those comments. Councillor Leishman. Sorry, Councillor Leishman, bad timing here.
Thank you, Convener. It's quite all right. That's been the story of me for about the last 3-4 days, to be honest. Thank you, and to Executive Director Devlin for the report and all the officers that have worked so hard on it. Embarking on an ambitious housing programme as part of the solution to the housing inequality crisis we currently face is necessary. And the need for a primary school in the Bertha Park development is obvious, with just over 2,500 houses anticipated to be built in the next decade. And with new housing, the report predicted that there will be approximately 678 primary school pupils needing to be accommodated. A new primary school at Bertha Park will also have an impact in my ward, as Tulloch Primary School's catchment area will be altered, and thank you to council officers for the engagement with pupils at the school. Finally, after reading yesterday's Dundee edition of the Courier, the lead story was the EIS leaving the board of the East End Community Campus because of concerns regarding the new school due to replace Braveview Academy and Craigie High, not meeting the learning needs of young people, especially given the large numbers of pupils that have additional support needs. The EIS also had concerns that teaching staff weren't fully consulted, and the result being that the near final plans have some wholly inappropriate features. In Perth and Kinross, I know that we value our teaching staff, and in opening new schools or in renovating existing ones, we have the chance to tap into the knowledge and expertise our staff have. There are many ways for us to try and close the educational attainment gap, two of which are continuing to empower our teachers in decision making in curriculum and non-curriculum matters alike. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leishman. If there are no more comments, can we agree the report? Thank you. We will move on to paper 7, which is the School Estate Transformation Programme, and which will also be introduced by Sheena Devlin, our Executive Director. Thank you, Sheena.
Thank you, Convener, and committee will note that there's a bit of a pattern emerging in my opening remarks introducing each report, but I think it's important for the record that we're just clear about where particular decisions were taken. So in August 2016, as part of the Council's transformation strategy, the then Lifelong Learning Committee approved the principles to be used as a basis for the transformation review, securing the future of the school estate. Following this, the committee approved the development of a number of options appraisals to consider in detail on a phased basis schools which were identified as requiring further consideration. Since the establishment of the School Estate Transformation Programme, significant work has been undertaken, and that is reflected in the paper before committee today. A number of projects have been concluded, along with clarity of direction and decisions provided by committee on further projects which are currently being progressed, some of which are considered by the Learning and Families Committee today. In March 2020, the Council approved a 30-year investment blueprint which will consider all identified strategic drivers and how these are likely to drive investment decisions. Strategies around assessment, management, planning of the learning estate will link into this investment blueprint, ensuring that capital investment planning is affordable, is responsive and fits to the changing needs within our various communities. The report prepared details the work that has been undertaken to date, the actions still required, and the schools previously identified that formed a future phase of the programme. Today, this committee is being asked to consider and approve the proposals of the report, which would see the current existing programme conclude. Any future review would be determined by the principles of the investment blueprint, the previously agreed financial strategy, and the previously agreed learning estate management plan, with any new proposals being brought back to this committee if agreed, in August 2023. In addition, future projects may of course still be considered as part of normal asset management planning and would then of course be reported through the appropriate governance framework. Convener, there are a range of officers here who'd be happy to answer questions that committee may have. Thank you.
Thanks again, Sheena. Councillor Stewart, do you have more than one question? Just go for it.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks very much to officers for bringing forward the report. I wondered in the first instance whether it might be helpful for members of the committee to have a list of schools along with their current and projected roles, their capacity and therefore their percentage occupancy and the condition and suitability. An up-to-date list would maybe just, it would certainly help my understanding of going through this paper, but maybe that could be brought back as a briefing note afterwards.
Yep.
Thank you. In 4.8, there's reference to some of the significant challenges about managing the learning estate over coming years, including changing demographics and population growth and movement. And I just wondered which particular projections for population growth were being used for this. Obviously, there are a lot of housing developments and areas set aside under LDP2, but also if you look at ONS projection, population projections, the population of Perth is projected to decline, and it's also getting older and therefore with less need for school places. So which projections are being used there?
Karen?
Identified them again.
Brian, please again then. Thank you, Brian.
No problem. Well, I think the answer there is actually a mixture of information that is used. So we have within our own team Paul Davison, who gives us data which comes from CAI data through NHS and through population and through growth. We also have house building statistics and strategies through the audits that are used and put in the spreadsheets. We have quite complex spreadsheets with all these different information. So we try to use all that information, different factors, and then we look at local history as well and what these factors have shown us, and we can see from different housing developments, different schemes, different areas, how this has been affected. So it's constantly modelled, constantly looked at, and the team, it's part of the team's everyday work, keeping that information up to date and looking at it. There is a variety of information that is used that goes into that.
Okay, thank you. And just to quickly follow up on that point, did the modelling that's used, all of your algorithms and formulae in your spreadsheets and so on, historically, how accurate has it been?
Yes, it is something that it has been very accurate. So we are quite confident in the information that we have and how we review that. So absolutely, it has proven to be accurate with all our pupil role projections and so forth. That has been accurate. Yes. I would just add, so in the LEMP, just for your first question, just on your first point, the LEMP that was presented in November 21 to committee, which has been the Lifelong Learning Committee at the time, it has the information you're asking for at that point in time. So that is all detailed in there, and obviously we can get an updated list that stands just now for you.
Thanks very much. That answers my next question, which was what's the learning estate management plan? I wasn't on lifelong learning, so I'll look forward to seeing a next version of that. My final question then is in 5.2 in the ongoing projects, there's reference to phase Pitlochry High School being in phase 2 and the outcomes of the feasibility study that was completed in May 2022 to provide options are being considered. I just wondered when the result of that consideration would come forward to elected members.
Brian, is that you again?
Yes, thank you.
Thank
Yes.
you, Brian.
Yeah, as you rightly say, it was received in the summer of 22. We do have just a new member of staff that started as one of our new quality improvement officers, and they're actually working with the college just now as well, reviewing the specification. So the scope for that is actually a little bit dated now, pre-COVID, for how things have been offered and so forth. So we are just reviewing the specification that is correct for how it's been reviewed in the feasibility study. So it's something we're working through at the moment. Exact timescales I couldn't say right now, but we do tend to come back in the next 2 to 3 months or so with the further information for the stakeholders on that and meet with the group again to review the information.
Thanks again, Brian. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, convener. It's just for my own personal clarification on 7.1 table 3. There's a reference to life expired buildings. Does that mean that the buildings would have to be replaced if the school were to continue or reopen? Thank you.
Brian, please.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, life expired buildings is some terminology used by our property colleagues, which can be applied to, as you can imagine, the buildings that have expired their life. That doesn't mean they immediately need replaced, but it means they are being considered for replacement alongside all our properties. So they are all basically being considered, monitored and condition constantly assessed on these, and then the relevant projects will be brought back to committee and looked at and prioritised as the need arises, but everyone's on a case-by-case basis.
Thanks again, Brian. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, convener. My question kind of follows on from Councillor McPherson's point about the life expired buildings. I think you and myself and others that have been extensively around the school estate know that there are a number of schools that have got buildings that are either life expired or, you know, they're certainly not as modern as we would like them to be. And there is that risk that if we don't keep up the pace of investment, we end up with a kind of two-tier system where, you know, you can have a very charming Victorian school building, but actually if you compare the facilities to one of our brand new modern ones, it really is like night and day. And I suppose my question is for you, convener, about how you will keep up pace and challenge with the Scottish Government about the funding packages that are in place. You know, we know that our budgets are more and more restricted, and the capital funding projects that are available often come with quite strict criteria on them, which wouldn't necessarily match our small rural school estate. So I think that's a question for you as to whether you will lobby the Scottish Government on our behalf to perhaps look at funding packages that we could then apply to schools. Off the top of my head, places like Comrie, for example, which is desperately needing investment in the school estate. I just went from one that was as far away from my own local ward as I could think of, or Kirkmichael being another, and that perhaps there could be something brought back to committee in due course outlining the response from the government to that request. Thank you.
I think the straight answer to your question about lobbying is always, we do as a group constantly. The answer in a broader sense will be that it will be really difficult. And I think we will, as we get into budget considerations, I'm sure there will be a robust debate about why funding is tight. And I'm sure we will all come at it from a different perspective. But your point is absolutely valid, though, in terms of our rural schools that need improved. And that is a role that I will take seriously, that we will take seriously as a group. And we will do the best that we can, is all I can say without making rash promises. But I think that the premise to your question is absolutely valid.
Just to clarify, it's not just rural schools. I'm aware of more urban ones that are in a similar needs for investment.
Yeah, and without being too parochial about it, I've rarely go to a parent council, or when I was chair of the parent council at early days, that was a constant ask. So absolutely, point noted. Did you have other questions, Councillor Shires? Or were they all kind of rolled into that one?
I just missed the other one. My question was, looking at the investment blueprint, is how will we involve communities in discussions around future investment?
Councillor Shires, I'm very conscious that our new chief executive, although not so new now, a year in post, is absolutely keen that community engagement is a key part of the wider corporate asset management strategy and the development of that. So there would be a commitment that communities across all of Perth and Kinross would be involved in that wider piece of work linked to the investment blueprint.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. Councillor Barrett, please.
Thank you, convener. Mine's related to Councillor Shires' point just about funding. I'm looking at 5.2, the ongoing projects. We've discussed Abernight and Riverside, we know is underway, but there's Braco looking for a new school building 2025, Cleash proposals to come back, Medvin, the design work for the new hall. We've spoken about Pitlochry. Are these things that are ongoing projects? Is there funding already allocated for these next stages, or is this something that we're going to have to look at in the budget or through the investment blueprint process?
Thanks, Councillor Barrett. Sheena?
The very short answer, Councillor Barrett, is that these are funded projects, so there is money available for these. Thank you.
Phew, that's good news.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor McDade, Provost, please. Sandra.
Thank you, convener. My question is around 5.1. Those of us who were on the previous Lifelong Learning Committee will remember Logie Ammond, which came early in the previous rounds of the School Estate Review. And at that point, I think it was Vice Convener Wilson who applied a 5-year review to the condition of the paper. And the paper we have here says the occupancy has been reviewed and the school currently has 10 pupils. Is that to comply with the we will review the school roll in 5 years' time and that's done, or is that no longer happening, or what? Just a bit of clarity around that, please.
I think there's an answer here in response to the administration, and I think in the short term, the straight answer is yes. That's the review done. The sword of Damocles, I would argue, has been hanging over the school for 5 years. I would quite like to remove that sword from above the head. Any further review into Logie Ammond will be in line with 30-year blueprints and financial strategies, etc. I don't think there's anything needs added to that if you're satisfied with that answer.
I'm happy as long as that is communicated to the parent council, that is the position, and that basically they are safe, and as to echo Councillor Shire's point earlier, having also been around significant parts of the school estate, Logie Ammond is one that could do some investment, in my opinion. So I hope that might be considered as part of the blueprint.
Yeah, communication point noted. I think it's really important that elected members have the chance to look at this before we make any firm promises. But hopefully we're going to do that this afternoon. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, convener. I just want to ask, when the school roll is significantly in excess of nominal capacity, what is the strategy for dealing with that situation?
I'm looking at Can here. I'm not sure the school roll does ever get beyond nominal capacity, or does it?
I'm assuming it does, otherwise there wouldn't be a capacity.
We have a physical capacity in terms of the size and number of classrooms in our building, which we are required to report on. You are correct that our schools don't operate over capacity in terms of the overall capacity of the building. There can be occasions where a particular class may be full to its capacity and would not be able to take any further children into that class, and these circumstances are managed through the council's normal admissions policy, where the local authority then has to identify another or next nearest school which does have space, but these are very few and far between across the year, and the number of those instances are reported back to this committee on an annual basis as part of our reserved places and maximising capacities report. So that would be updated to the committee in March time. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Sheena, would you like to add anything to that?
Convener, the only thing I would like to add is in relation to the maximising capacities report that Karen Robertson mentioned that we bring back here. People who have previously been on lifelong learning may remember that we brought a paper that was approved that related to the metrics that are used for classroom sizes, and that the metrics that are used in Perth and Kinross exceed the nationally expected metrics. And so that also provides us with a bit of cushion in relation to perhaps on occasion and only on a needs basis, temporarily increasing capacity, but still within legal requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena.
Can I come back?
Of course, Councillor Reid. Apologies as well if I didn't quite understand your question, but yeah, by all means, come back.
I am being incredibly parochial. I am talking about the local primary school in Auchterarder, and I have been told by many sources within the school that it is absolutely full to capacity and exceeds capacity by quite some amount. Maybe I have been given misinformation.
My suspicion is you have been given misinformation. Yeah, and Karen Robertson's confirming that.
Thank you, Convener. I don't have the exact details in terms of figures right in front of me just now, Councillor Reid, but we can provide that. But I can assure you that the primary school at Auchterarder is not operating over the physical capacity of the building.
Would it be helpful, Councillor Reid, if you have a conversation with Karen Robertson offline?
Yeah, very much so. No, if you can forward the figures, the capacity and the actual size of the school roll at the moment, that would be very helpful. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
No, not at all. We'll provide it to everybody on the committee, actually. I think would be a fairer way to do it. But thank you for the question. Thank you. Councillor Freshwater.
Thank you very much, Convener. My question has mostly been answered in relation to the question by Councillor Barrett, but it was just again to continue to be parochial, if I may, around Cleash Primary School. Obviously, it's reassuring to hear that the funding is still in place, notwithstanding that costs are going up, particularly construction costs. But I just wondered if we could get a little bit more clarity about the kind of timeframes. Obviously, summer 2023 is not that long away, not that far away. It was just if we could get an idea of when we'll have an update to the committee on the progress of Cleash Primary. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Freshwater. Brian, the last time you put a shirt and a tie on if you're going to get asked all these questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the response for coming back on Cleash really is with regards to the updated feasibility for the 23 with the project to then follow on with timescales. So that's part of the work that's to be undertaken. So there's quite significant work with the full feasibility, the full project to be undertaken. And then, as you rightly say, that the plan is to come back. I thought it was later 23, but with dates we are committed to coming back to committee. We will come back with the programme at that point and fitting in with the whole capital programme.
Thank you, Brian. Again, look, Councillor Freshwater, I think the frustration, I think the point will be noted. I visited Cleash with Councillor Waters in 2017 or 2018, I think, and it, obviously COVID has delayed things, but I think, again, the point noted, so thank you for the question. Councillor McDade, please.
Thank you, Convener, and just to assist Councillor Reid from a quick check, the current school roll in Auchterarder for the primary school is 456 according to the council's website, and the capacity is 514. So it's a good 60 under capacity at the moment. But on to my question.
Very close to capacity then.
It's got a good 10% there possibly, but
I think we'll move on if you can
anyway,
answer your question. Appreciate
my question is around Pitlochry, much to everyone's shock, I'm sure, to be parochial here, and to query around the future of Pitlochry Primary School replacement. Members will recall that about in June 2018, Pitlochry Primary School, which had been due for a replacement, which would have been opened this year, was removed from the capital programme at that point due to the need to urgently fund the Perth High School replacement and was ditched with a lot of other projects, some of which have made it back into the capital programme. And indeed other projects have now made it into the capital programme since then. However, Pitlochry Primary School, which is of the same building construction type as Perth High School, as Kinross Primary and a number of other primaries that have since been replaced, it is the last of that construction type, which was deemed unsuitable a while ago. The life expectancy of the building is supposed to be 25 years, and it will soon be coming on for something along the lines of 55 at the end of this council term, I think. And therefore, we used money that was originally allocated in the capital programme for the high school to keep the primary school building wind and watertight in the last 5 years. I would like some clarity on what the current position with and planning around potential replacement of that school is.
Thank you, Provost. I'll ask Brian to come in, but I will look forward to conversations with you in the near future with regards to that. I don't know if you want to add anything though, Brian.
Yeah, I'll give you as much understanding I have of the situation, which is quite right. There was the funding previous Pitlochry that was moved around, and new priorities were voted on and taken forward by council. And I think, just as we've mentioned on the start of the presentation of this report, is that Pitlochry, we, along with all the other schools, as part of a learning estate management plan, as part of the investment blueprint, as part of looking at conditions, suitability, climate change, all these factors, all our buildings, the life expired buildings that mentioned, all these have to be considered alongside each other for priorities moving forward. So there isn't anything in the current plan for Pitlochry primary school replacement. There has been, there's been some significant investment in the building across the whole, with the secondary and the primary recently, with various works, AV audio-visual equipment, Wi-Fi equipment, decoration, lighting, etc., new roofs. So there has been 2 million plus invested and going up towards 2.8 million in the building as it stands. But with regards to future, we'll need to wait and see what comes forward.
Provost.
Thank you. Can I just get clarity? The 2.2 million, I think it was, that you mentioned there, that was the money that was originally in the capital budget for the secondary school alone, in addition to the 13.8 for the primary school, which has now been used across the whole of the school, primary and secondary. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure off the top of my head it was 2.8 million eventually as a property budget, so it was helping property services, and they have used that, as you quite say, for the whole building, and investing in the building for a number of improvements. We've been involved through Education Children's Services in assisting with those improvements and advising on things and priorities within the school as well. So yes, you're correct, it was 2.8 million within property services and used across the whole estate there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Provost. If there are no more questions, I will formally move the report, and in doing so, again, thank officers, even more so than other papers, because there has been a lot of work over the years, particularly in phase 1 and phase 2 of the school estate transformation programme. There's been a lot of angst and sleepless nights, and that's just Councillor Shires and I think, but there's also a lot of good positive work come from the first 2 phases, all of which is detailed here, but not least Riverside Primary. So thank you to all the officers over the years, and indeed going forward, for the work that's been involved. And I would very much like to move formally this report.
I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Carr. I note that there's a comment for Councillor Shires, but you have an amendment, Provost.
I do. I'm quite happy to let Councillor Shires go first if she wants, but I'm quite happy to go whichever way. She got her comment in ahead of my amendment. So,
thank you, Councillor Shires. Go for it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Shires. Yes. So, if it's possible, if the committee could put the amendment terms on the screen. I'll speak to it in the meantime. So we're really just looking to add a few words around specifically looking at feasibility of ELC provision in rural primary schools that don't have one at the moment, as well as a wider catchment analysis that can look to utilise the available capacity in our schools. And I think a lot of this will probably be done anyway as part of the course, but I just want a bit of a bit more specificity around it within the actual agreed recommendations by the committee. So I mean, I hope that you might consider incorporating that, convener, but that's, could it possibly also be emailed around the committee if that's possible, just so people can have it on their screens?
Thank you, Provost. Just for the purposes of clarity in reading this, I don't think you're asking for a formal catchment review here, more of a tabletop exercise almost to look at what we might look at. Would that be?
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, it's the sort of thing that I think officers have discussed doing in the past. And I think it's one of these things that this is a good opportunity when we're considering the blueprint, etc., doing it in the round to do it, but as a tabletop exercise, absolutely not anything that involves a statutory consultation.
Thank you. If there's no, there's a second amendment actually, perhaps we should see that before I comment. You're seconding the amendment. That makes me feel a little bit better, Councillor Stewart, thank you. Do you want to say anything formally in seconding it? Yeah, come in with a comment first of all, please.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I think the discussions that we've had on the two prior papers, making Abernight's school role sustainable by increasing the catchment area, and indeed in this, sorry, one of the previous papers, and indeed in this paper where we've talked about the institution of nurseries at certain primary schools, helping to shift the balance to make the school role sustainable, particularly in our smaller rural schools, necessitates that we do undertake the catchment analysis to bring forward further reviews, but also that we look at the feasibility of introducing nurseries or ELC provision. I think the motion has it in its terms in all of our rural primary schools. Clearly, obviously, without making any commitment that that could be done at the moment, but if members are to be able to give strategic direction in the future, we will need to have those options available to us. And I think that the motion, the amendment from Provost McDade and myself helps to achieve that. Separate from that, can I just say, can I add my thanks to the officers for bringing forward the paper and the work that's gone into it, and the work that's gone into you know, the school estate transformation programme and the learning estate management plan, much more broadly than just the paper before us today. And can I also say, given that in phase 3 of what would have been phase 3 of the school estates review, there were 5 out of the 7 schools there actually in Ward 2. I'm glad to see that we're drawing a line under the school estates review, which I think has it has produced a lot of great improvements, but I think it's also in places created the uncertainty, the Damoclean sword that you were referring to, I think, convener, earlier. So I'm glad to see that we will be instead looking at things in the round, and I commend the amendment to you and your second.
I'm going to ask our Executive Director to make a brief comment at this point.
Councillor Stewart, I think one of the things you just said there is actually, well, not just one of them, but really important, but of particular import, and that is about doing things in the round. And I think the paper that's before committee today is about looking at the built school estate in the round of all corporate assets and not separate to that. So understanding what facilities there are in all localities or wards, however you want to, you know, however we end up demarking this in future. So I think that's a really, really important point, that we do understand that this is a bigger review, if you like, that's been suggested by the paper from officers that is actually about all of that in the round. And that then, if you like, goes back to the point I made in response to a question about community engagement. That will be an important part of this wider piece of work, which will extend beyond education and children's services and will in fact be council wide. So I think that that's a really welcome point. And your earlier question, you know, in relation to the projections and looking at future roles is Timaeus and links to what's here, because actually that is what we do already. So that is not new business for us in terms of looking at that information. Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Sheena. Given your reassuring answer to my question, Provost, I'm inclined just to put this in with the motion.
Thank you very much, Convener.
Not at all. Any comments, please? Sorry, Councillor Shires, you had a comment in a while back.
Thank you, Convener. Just in reflecting on the paper that's in front of us, we very much welcome this report and the recommendations in it. Our administration from 2017 to 2022, seems a long time ago now, set about a continuing programme of review of our school estate to ensure that our children and young people were being taught in the very best facilities possible. There were some who it suited to label that programme in a negative way. However, this report clearly lays out the significant investment and commitment to the tune of 190 million, which is set to be made between 2020-21 and 28-29, on top of the 95 million invested in 2015-16. I would like to thank all the officers in Education and Children's Services who work so hard in ensuring we have all the information needed about condition and suitability, and particularly pay tribute to the teams in the property department who do a sterling job in keeping our buildings window and watertight, but also knowing the exact status of them. Through to those who look at projections in house building and roll numbers, and those who deal with consultation and design, lots of behind the scenes people that we often don't see when it's a written report in front of us. We're very proud of the record of investment, and we look forward to working with you to deliver that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. Any further comment? Councillor Donaldson.
I'm not usually a member of this committee, so I'm not going to say a huge amount. However, like others, I do want to thank the ECS team for all the work they've done, the work that's been put in. Councillor Stewart, I think it was, I certainly welcome, it would be very helpful indeed to have a rundown of all the schools. We've got the figures on the pupil equity funding. We'll come to that later on. And it's not asking for a whole mass of data, you know, that we almost end up with analysis paralysis, but it would be helpful to have, you know, what are the school roles per each school, occupancy rates in particular, and a number of items of, you know, key data, so we can do a kind of contrast and compare. I think that would be useful. Councillor Shires has referred to Comrie, and I hear what she's saying. I'm not so au fait with the position at Kilmichael, but yes, there are indeed questions on rural schools. What, though, I would say to you, and I'm just being quite truthful here, you know, at this very moment, we have the Deputy First Minister and the Acting Finance Secretary standing up in the Scottish Parliament. And I think there are going to be, you know, further announcements, sadly announced this afternoon. And that is because the Scottish Government has to adhere to a balanced budget. We ourselves, and I think all of us know, the budget review process is going to start in earnest really next week. There's going to be really painful choices, let's be quite honest. It's going to be difficult, but we ourselves also have to set by statute a balanced budget. And at the UK level, well, the 17th of this month, it's 2 weeks and a day away. We're going to get the medium-term financial plan. And that's going to, I'm not going to make a party political point here, all that good with these, but it's going to be very painful indeed. And we just do not know what that's going to involve in terms of tax rises and in terms of spending cuts. And that will have a knock-on effect on us in Scotland and in turn on us as a council. And we just know getting away from that fact. We want as much as possible to be able to protect and defend all that's been achieved on the education front here in Perth and Kinross. I certainly, in my own mind, I think there's a question here, with buildings that do need improvement, need to for repair, is the trade-off between can you defer expenditure and the consequences that has, or is it more economic in some instances to go for repair and maintenance, and actual fact longer term you actually spend less, just in terms of the hard figures, and also clearly in terms of the community and young folk as a whole. So that's all I'm going to say, but it's not going to be easy. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. I think there will be many more difficult conversations around this issue to be had over the coming weeks and months, so thank you for those comments. If there are no more comments, can we agree the paper?
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. At this point, we have three papers to consider yet. We're an hour and 10 minutes in. I'm quite happy to carry on, but I wonder if members want a comfort break. Continue. Yep. Comfort. I think if there's any members want a comfort break, we will have one now, and we will resume at 3:20. 10 minutes. A man of my age needs 10 minutes, Provost. Thank you, everybody. We will make a start again, if that's okay. Paper 8 is the Tayside plan for children, young people and families, which is also to be introduced by Sheena Devlin, our Executive Director.
Thank you, Convener. This Children's Services Plan update report provides details on the continued commitment to working in partnership across the Tayside Regional Improvement Collaborative to help deliver on our shared objectives. The primary aim of the plan is to help ensure our children have the best start in life and that Tayside is the best place to grow up. There have been strenuous efforts to ensure that voices of children and young people are heard in determining our priorities for improvement, and this is reflected in the actions detailed in this report. Despite the unprecedented challenges over the last 2 and a bit years, many of the planned actions have indeed been fulfilled, and the report then outlines work undertaken in each of the strategic priority groups, which are numbered 1 to 5, which outline the progress made during 2021 and the planned actions for 22-23. There are officers online and in the chamber, Convener, who will be happy to answer any questions committee have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Thank you, Councillor Kigali, for making that clear. If you can do all the questions in one area, we'll come back to you with the second one, if that's okay. Thank you.
Is that working? Yeah. So on page 22 and 23 of the report, it talks about mental health provision and counselling specifically. It references that only 1/3 of those receiving help are boys, and especially given that it's Men's Mental Health Awareness Month this month, and there's lots of boys and young people across the country, and I'm sure in Perth and Kinross, that don't feel they can reach out and get help. What's being done to encourage them to do that and make them aware that it is okay? Shall I just keep going with the other ones on the topic? It says that 400 people have completed counselling, but doesn't actually, what does completed counselling actually mean? Would be quite helpful to know. And what support is being given for the transition out of school and out of full-time education? Because if they lose their, I'm not sure exactly how it works in terms of once they've left that environment, the support that they can still receive afterwards.
Thanks, Councillor Kigali, for very pertinent questions. Sharon, I don't know whether you want to answer some of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. To answer the first question in relation to the fact that only 1/3 of boys actually take up the counselling offer in schools, that's been well recognised as part of the trialling out of counselling in schools across the country. That counselling, as it is currently organised within our schools, doesn't fit all young people. So girls tend to prefer a one-to-one counselling approach, boys don't. And in fact, it seems that young people from more deprived backgrounds do not either take up this offer in the same way. In Perth and Kinross, we were well aware of that at the very start of the process, and we did in fact trial a number of different ways of providing counselling. We continue to do that. The Scottish Government were very flexible with the fact that we wanted to plan quite differently within Perth and Kinross, and so therefore we have had a number of different providers providing different aspects of counselling, and one of the things that we're looking to do with the funding this year is in fact to introduce a group counselling project, which seems to be more efficacious for some groups. So we continue to listen to our young people to look at what methods suit them best. We've looked at online methods of supporting young people. We've looked at groups. We've also looked at providing services from our other providers such as Lighthouse and other agencies. To answer your second question around what does counselling completed look like, that is where there is an agreement between the person who is seeking counselling and the counsellor about what the goals are to be achieved, and when both feel that those goals have been achieved and that counselling has come to a natural end, then those sessions are then completed. What happens as a result of that are different in every case. It very much depends on the individual. So it may be that they are signposted to other agencies. They might be signposted to a key adult within the school for further support, or indeed for that group work that we talked about. One of the things that's come out in our feedback from young people is that peer support is also very important for young people, and the other piece of work that we're trialling is we're introducing more peer support programs, and we've got some training underway in our schools at the moment, Councillor Kigali, just to take that forward too. I hope that answers all three of your questions.
Thank you, Sharon. Sheena, would you like to add something to that?
The only thing I would like to add, Councillor Kigali, is that, as Sharon said, we've been very cognizant of this different approach. And in discussions that Sharon and I have had with a couple of national groups who offer support, much of the offer of support is actually targeted at girls and young women. And we specifically requested that these groups consider what they might do for groups of boys and young men, and that would be our preferred approach from their interventions. And those groups have gone away to think about what that might actually be, and we'd be happy to work with them on the basis that they're able to come back with something that was quite bespoke and specific for groups of young boys to help support them in that way. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart, I think you have a question related to these issues. And then Councillor Kigali, if you want to come back in, that would be great.
Thank you, convener. It was specifically just to follow up on the second of Councillor Kigali's questions there. So the report says almost 400 children and young people have completed counselling so far this year, with 78% of children and young people reporting improved outcomes following access to counselling. That means that almost 1 in 4 did not report an improved outcome. So, you know, getting on for 100 out of those 400. And so I wondered what the next step for that cohort is, but also just to understand from the 400, are any of these re-referrals, so that, you know, somebody might have had either multiple referrals within a year or multiple counselling sessions within a year, or separate blocks of it, or have repeated from previous years, possibly pointing to an underlying issue?
Councillor Stewart, it is very difficult to give a one answer to that because it's so different for different people. What we've tried to do, as the Executive Director said, we were aware of the fact that one-to-one counselling is not the catch-all for all young people. We've done our best to make sure that the referrals that go to counsellors are the right ones, and we undertook to provide training for all of our guidance teachers with Dundee University, in fact, to do some initial training to help them understand where it might be useful to use a counselling approach to support young people and where it might be helpful to do something else. And you'll see from the results that, you know, we haven't had a 100% success rate, that counselling was indeed the right approach for some of those young people. But where that isn't right, then the other things that we've been working with are the other ways that we will look at that. So it might be group work, it will be peer support. That certainly is coming through as something that young people tell us that is the most beneficial to them. Other times it might be with a key adult, and sometimes it's for outside agencies and for other people outside of school to be able to support these young people. It's very different, but what we are trying to do is to gather that information and get feedback from people. Counselling in schools is still quite new, so we're still picking up the evaluation for that. We are undertaking an evaluation with the university. That's underway at the moment, and it might be useful for members to get some information once that's completed, and the evaluation gives us some more feedback about that. Just in response to whether there's a potential for a repeat, there is, if it's felt to be useful, so that it's not that, you know, when a young person gets their, you know, their 10 sessions, then, you know, that goes down and that's it, they don't get anything else. If it's felt that that would be useful for them at a later stage, then that is of course welcome. Yeah.
Thank you for that very comprehensive answer to some very difficult but important and pertinent questions. I think you had a second set of questions, Councillor Kigali.
Yeah, so I've got some more questions on the virtual campus. It's quite glaring there that nobody did French. Firstly, do we know why? And have the subjects that are going to be added, do we know that people are actually going to do them? What work has been done to make sure that there is the appetite for them? We're not just kind of, you know, playing on a guess. And if I'm going to just rattle through the rest of them, because they're kind of small ones, some pupils have raised questions over or issues over timetabling and what's being done to manage that. Do we have data on how the young people, there's not many of them that have been involved so far, have felt that it's worked, and what is the long-term projection on how quick we can get more people on board and, you know, accessing more opportunities?
Thank you. David McCluskey, possibly, please. Online.
Absolutely, yes. So I'll try to answer those questions. There's quite a few, so if I miss any, I'm sure you'll keep me right. I mean, the first thing is in terms of success of those who have participated in virtual campus. So yeah, that has been successful for us. So we had 8 young people gaining an advanced higher award in virtual campus offer last year in terms of PKC virtual campus that we put forward. In terms of the offer last year, in terms of that French advanced higher offer, yeah, there was probably less uptake for that from other subjects. I suppose it's all part of the kind of ongoing scoping that we do in terms of the wide curricular need right across not 1 but 3 different local authorities to ensure that they're correct and to ensure that we've got the capacity to deliver those offers. I think as we move forward into the current session, you know, we have a number of virtual campus subjects offered here in Perth and Kinross, higher politics, higher admin and IT. 15 pupils embarking upon these courses this session, and they're underway and going successfully and looking to build upon the success of last year's virtual campus offer. And in terms of the TRIC virtual campus, we've built upon that as well. We've got 6 advanced hires being offered there in terms of Spanish, French, computing, PE, business and modern studies. So the campus has been successful and is growing as we move through it. We're also looking to expand the number of courses that we do within those offers that I've just explained there. We have actually 18 young people from PAKC who are engaging this year, which is a significant increase in where we were last year. And in terms of expansion of resource in the virtual campus, we've also arranged for a number of National 3 resources. So we've now got 7 courses available at level 3 for young people within Perth and Kinross to engage with virtually, albeit that those are supported a wee bit more than the advanced higher courses are, as you might expect. Additionally, throughout the TRIC, as part of our STEM offer, there's what's called the Open Tay Learning programme, which again looks to deliver virtual learning across STEM subjects, and that's at level 1 and level 3. So yeah, it's a growing area. It's an area that we're learning in. It's an area that we're delivering success in. And it's an area where we're looking to pull together our capacity together with that demand that you've just expressed there. I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
Thank you, David, and thank you for those very important and pertinent questions, Councillor Kigali. Thank you. Councillor Barrett, you have a question, please.
Thank you, convener. This is something that I've followed up on before in previous reports. On pages 133 and 150, there's reference to the mobile phone app and website to assist families in accessing information on income maximisation and fuel insecurity. And given the cost of living crisis, the impact that having easy access to this could have, I'm wondering, is this operational yet, the mobile phone app?
Thanks for that also pertinent question, Councillor Barrett. Hazel Robertson, please.
Thank you. Yes, I have a response for you. I mean, clearly it is a really important issue, particularly in this time of cost of living crisis. But I'm pleased to be able to report that what I've been informed is the mobile app is currently under development and it is expected to be available from January next year. So that will be available from then.
Good, that's good progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. If there are no more questions, I will move the report at this point. Councillor Shires.
Apologies, convener, it seems to take a while to click through. I had a bit of a follow-up on the questions that Councillor Kigali asked about the virtual campus, if I may. One of the questions that we were seeking to find out about was about the young people's experience of the virtual campus. Anecdotally, having spoken to some 6 years now left, there were sort of I'm hoping teething problems in terms of the spaces within schools that they could go in and concentrate on their virtual lesson, which seem to prove a little bit difficult in some buildings. Again, probably down to timetabling and making sure that that is, I know it's very operational stuff, but we have invested in the virtual campus and really keen to make sure it works. On the round of university open days at the moment with my daughter, and aware of the range of subject opportunities that young people have in different parts of the country who are all then going to university and applying for courses. We want to make sure that our young people are punching as far above their weight as they possibly can be. So it is really important to us that this virtual campus works. So I'm not sure perhaps if a paper could be brought back to committee in due course on this subject, just outlining how it's going and how we want to see it proceed in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. I'm sure a paper at some point would be appropriate. I don't know, David, whether you want to add anything to that at this point.
Yes, certainly be happy to provide more information. I suppose one point of information round about the operational requirements in school, because you're quite right, that's where a lot of the grist happens. We've used some of our budget motion money to appoint virtual learning regents in each of our secondary schools, and that's exactly their job, is to ensure that every young person who's engaging in virtual learning has the time, space and device to be able to engage in their virtual learning, and also a point of contact that they can go to from a pastoral point of view in that virtual learning experience. But yes, happy to provide that paper if requested.
Thank you, David. Our executive director is suggesting possibly as well, if we have some teachers and young people who have done it, to put a presentation together. I think that might be helpful. I also have a recently left school leaver living in the house with me who had a very positive experience of the virtual campus. He did politics at another school, which I feel mildly guilty about, but that's another story. But I know that that's a very small sample size of one. So again, thank you for the question. If there are no more questions at this point, I will move the report, and in doing so, I want to again very genuinely thank Hazel Robertson and her team for their work in these matters. The Tayside Children's Services Plan Update report provides us with confidence in the delivery of appropriate services for our children and young people. Within Perth and Kinross, it is evident that there has been effective partnership working throughout 21-22, and that despite the challenges we've all faced from COVID, there have been many achievements. The opportunity for shared learning is clearly demonstrated throughout this report, and there are ambitious actions for the immediate future. This report confirms progress made on the identified priorities and outlines clear actions being taken to address what is an outstanding need in 22-23. I am very pleased to move this report.
I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Any comments on the report? In that case, can we agree it? Thank you very much. At this point, we'll move on to paper 9, which is pupil equity funding. Our executive director again is going to introduce it, and then I'm going to pass on to Councillor Carr to ask if there's any questions and then move the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Pupil equity funding is a national initiative to provide additional funding allocated directly to schools by the Scottish Government based upon the number of pupils from P1 through to S3 who are eligible for free school meals. And I'm thankful to Councillor Massey for asking me a question in recess, which will make me add just a little bit further information to my introduction. That is not for pupils who get free school meals as part of the universal free school meal entitlement. Pupil equity funding is related to those pupils who are eligible for free school meals because of qualifying benefits. So just to make that clear to committee, thank you. Across Perth and Kinross Council, the pupil equity funding allocation for 22-23 and for each year until 25-26 is £1.8 million. Schools in Perth and Kinross are supported by Education and Children's Services officers to deliver targeted support for children and young people affected by poverty to help achieve their full potential, focusing on literacy, numeracy and health and well-being. This funding is utilised in a coherent and planned manner to maximise the impact on learning for all of those young people targeted in each school. Appendix 1 illustrates clearly how data has been collated to ensure the maximum effect of this programme. Selected case studies are used to help contextualise these approaches in individual schools, while Appendix 2 shows individual school allocations. Pupil equity funding budgets and spend plans are monitored throughout the school year, overseen by the Raising Attainment Board, providing support and guidance where appropriate. At this stage, can I also offer committee an apology for an important typo in paragraph 4.7. If only the amount of carry forward were true, we wouldn't be having any concerns about what might be happening in the future. The actual figure of the carry forward should not have the last three figures, the 0, 8 and 4 on it, just for clarity. Sincere apologies for that omission, that error. Convener, there are a number of colleagues here who would be able to answer any questions that committee might have in relation to the report. Thank you.
Before we move the report, are there any questions on the report? Councillor Freshwater.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener, and thank you very much to officers for preparing this paper. It's particularly useful for those of us who are new members to both the council and the committee. I was glad that when I was reading through the paper, a lot of the questions that were coming up at the outset were addressed in the conclusions and in the appendices of the paper. And I was particularly glad to see the some of the data, because the questions that were coming out were, this programme has been running, I think, since 2015, so it's obviously been going for some years. I suppose my question is just to clarify on the data that's provided in the I think it's the appendix. Is that just the data for the 1 year, or is that the accumulated data since the programme began, if that makes sense? Because I note in the conclusions, which I was glad to see, that there's obviously a desire to make better use of this data and to improve the tracking, and to also encourage some professional development around that, so we can really kind of see what interventions are working and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Freshwater. Can I ask David to come in on this?
Absolutely, yes. So the data that's presented in the report in terms of those pie and bar charts, that's a 1 year data rather than something cumulative over a number of years. And as it's explained in the report, that's been collected through our tool, our attainment analysis tool. And as you say, we're using that to help refine our approaches moving ahead into this session and beyond.
Thank you for that, David. Hopefully that answers your question. Oh, you come back, yep.
Thanks very much. Can I just ask, is there historical data available that we could sort of build up a picture? As I say, it's been sort of 7 years now, I think, since the fund started. Is it possible to kind of build a picture? I appreciate that the COVID years will probably throw in some curveballs, but I was just curious to see if how far back the tracking data is available. Thank you.
If you can come back in on that, David.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, yes, we do have obviously attainment data stretching back over that period of time. But what we have been doing over that period of time, and as you've mentioned, it's been a disrupted educational landscape as well in that stage, as we've been refining our approaches to data collection, so that we're trying to really isolate the effect of PEF interventions in terms of improving attainment, and that the fidelity of those improvements that we're able to ascribe specifically to PEF. So I'd say that while we do collect attainment data year on year, the strides that we've made this year would mean that data is more faithful to the PEF intervention than perhaps the year before. And as we have more and more schools coming on board with the Closing the Gap attainment tool, we'll get even closer and tighter focus upon that fidelity as well.
Thank you, David. And if that answers your questions, Councillor Freshwater, we'll move on to a question from Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Deputy Convener. First of all, can I just say, as Convener of Finance and Resources, had that carry forward been the case then, I would have been somewhat more optimistic for coming months. But you know, it's one of these things, and obviously it was a typo. Can I ask on? I've asked this question. I think it's of Sheena Devlin, but maybe David comes in on this, and it's what Councillor Freshwater is referring to and the historic data. But there is, you know, the pupil equity funding doesn't tie in with the council's own financial year. It's much more with the academic year, and so there's always, it looks as if there's an underspend when in actual fact there's not. But what you state here is, one, at end of July, 79% of the allocation for 21-22 had been spent. I would assume that we're now up to, you know, well over 100% on that. But can I ask, when the allocations made to individual schools, do head teachers draw down on a central fund, or, you know, are they given an allocation of actual money and then they can draw on that locally? How does the process work? And then I've got a follow-up actually on that.
Just playing microphone ping pong there. Sorry, apologies, I couldn't get my microphone on. In relation to the allocation of funding, the money goes directly to schools, so that is, each school will get its entitlement of money, and that's there for them to spend in the way that they would spend their pupil, what we call their per capita money as well. So it's the same approach, Councillor Donaldson. Money is devolved to the schools directly. We sign an agreement with the Scottish Government around PEF allocation, and that is the process for that. And you're absolutely right in terms of the apparent mismatch between how a financial year runs and how an academic year runs, and the spending plans are planned for an academic year and not for a financial year. And one of the other anomalies that will often feature then in the reporting is that sometimes it might look like there's significant amounts of money that are underspent, but that money may actually be committed. And so the example I would often use is that if you have decided to engage a teacher, for example, that teacher's salary would be paid monthly. So you will have given them a contract that may be for 12 months, but actually you're only decreasing your amount of budget by their monthly salary. So the money will be committed, but the amount that is actually spent will be less than the amount committed, and so sometimes that can account for what would appear to be an anomaly in amounts as well.
Yeah, just a follow-up ask. Obviously, each school has to improve attainment and to push young people up, has to produce an annual plan. There is, I can see now, a tracking app. I don't think all schools are yet on that, but the bulk are. And there's the involvement of quality improvement officers. But to what extent do head teachers have at least some leeway, and even to diverge if it's agreed from the plan during the course of the year? I'll give an example. You state later on about Murphley Primary School, and, you know, for outdoor learning, and that's very desirable, but that probably is something you can't do to the same degree with schools in, you know, central Perth, at least the same degree. So what leeway do head teachers have, and yet still the focus is on improving attainment? Thanks.
Thank you very much. In terms of the, you mentioned the 79% spend. Possibly of interest to committee to note that nationally the average is at 69%, so we're sitting at 10% above the average in terms of the amount that's spent in Perth and Kinross. So that's, I think, helpful to know. The tracking tool is indeed one that has been piloted across a number of schools. That will have been improved, and there's an expectation that all schools from now on, you know, will use the tracking tool. Absolutely. And then you ask about the latitude that head teachers have in terms of the spend. Head teachers will identify targeted groups of young people, or indeed universal groups within particular cohorts of young people, and in discussion with officers will consider what might the appropriate interventions be. There's significant support provided by education officers as to what we know has the greatest efficacy and the greatest impact in terms of evidence and research-based approaches, and schools would obviously be encouraged towards those. But within that, there is choice for head teachers, absolutely.
Thank you. Grateful for that.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. And if that's your question answered, I'll move on to a question from Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I've just got 2 questions here. When did head teachers in Perth and Kinross start receiving PFE money from the Scottish Government, and does it show that it's making a difference in closing the attainment gap?
I think what you can see from the data, Councillor McPherson, is that where head teachers have identified groups of children and given serious consideration to the appropriate interventions or resources, we are seeing a demonstrable impact in terms of that significant additional resource that almost all of our schools received. It's now been a number of years. In fact, Councillor Freshwater, you referenced the fact that this has been 7 years in the making so far. Thank you.
Thank you. And my other question was that PEF is specifically identified for closing the poverty-related attainment gap using the metric of the number of children receiving free school meals. I was just wondering what the process is once these children have been identified in terms of explaining to them and their parents why it is that they're receiving this additional support. How is that managed in terms of trying to avoid the sort of stigmatising effect that that might have?
The approach that schools would take would not be to have a discussion to identify groups of children and then discuss with them that the particular input that they're getting from their teacher or a support assistant is in any way related to this. It would be part of the planned curriculum for those pupils, so that it was absolutely natural and normal for that work to be delivered by the teachers or whichever agency, partner or other member of the support team is delivering the support. So there's no stigmatisation and no explicit targeting in a way that would single out any children.
Thank you for those questions, Councillor McPherson, and hopefully they've been answered sufficiently. I see that Councillor Shires, your question has already been answered, and if that's the case, we'll move on to a question from Councillor Barrett.
Okay, thank you. My questions have been answered largely through Stuart Donaldson's questions. Just getting my head around the carry forward, but obviously if we're below, above the national level for carry forward in a July, it's not an issue about us being limited and suddenly losing the money. So I think that's all been covered. Thank you.
My apologies, Councillor Barrett. I have noticed that your question was answered, so apologies for that. I see there's no more questions with regards to this. If that's the case, I'll now move to moving the report. I'm happy to move this report. It's clear that pupil equity funding is an important part of the empowerment of head teachers in schools, and it's a critical part of what is needed to help close the poverty-related attainment gap within our communities. I welcome the revised guidance for Perth and Kinross schools, which reflects the updated national guidance on the Scottish Attainment Challenge. With these increased arrangements now in place, which monitor the impact of the intervention and the spend plans, I feel that we have created the ability to progress. This report provides helpful information for members on the range of interventions now being employed. The case studies, for which I would like to thank head teachers and staff for their excellent work, show the direct impact on children and young people. Despite the challenges of COVID, we can see from this report how the funding is helping to support the most disadvantaged pupils to continue to make progress, showing positive results in their learning and their well-being. I'm especially pleased to note the excellent progress made over the past year. And on that basis, I would like that we approve this report. Are there any?
Apologies, Councillor Carr. Yes, I formally second it. Sorry.
Do we have any comments on the report? Councillor Shires?
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question was around the staying on rates for S4 and S5 pupils, that we note that they've reduced slightly, and concerns around why that might be and where. Sorry if I missed questions. Apologies. Can I phrase that as a question, as a comment? Sorry. Just concern around the S4 and S5 staying on rates, and hoping that we can be looking into that cohort, because that's a particularly important group that probably suffered quite badly under COVID. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Councillor Shires, and I'm sure council officers will take that to look at. As there's no more comments on this, when I move this report. Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you, Councillor Carr. I think the old heads there, between me forgetting to formally second and Councillor Shires asking a question and comments, we didn't do you any favours there in your debut, so my apologies for that. We'll move on to paper 10 at this point though, which is the raising attainment update, and there's no rest for the wicked because this will also be introduced by our Executive Director. Thank you.
None taken. This report provides an update to progress on the Education and Children's Services Raising Attainment Strategy 20 to 23. Specifically, it provides information on a range of performance measures across the priorities of what's called the National Improvement Framework for Education, or the NIF for short. A full update on performance is included in Appendix 1. Notable improvements are seen in some key measures, particularly in early years and primary, which form a foundation, of course, for later progress to be built on. There are also indications of the narrowing of poverty-related attainment gaps in some outcomes. A sustained focus will, of course, be maintained to reduce these further. The Scottish Government Framework for Recovery and Accelerating Progress has been developed to support the next phase of the Scottish Attainment Challenge. It aims to set high expectations, including annual stretch aims, and to help ensure significant progress is made in recovering from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and in achieving the mission, ultimately, of the Scottish Attainment Challenges. These are set out in Appendix 2. The stretch aims and targets will be revisited when the strategy is renewed in 2023. And officers obviously are here today, Convener, to help answer any questions that anybody may have. Thank you.
Thanks again, Sheena. There was certainly no literal meaning to my introduction there, so my apologies for that. If anybody has any questions, please can we have them now? If there are no questions, I will just move. There is questions, sorry. I think the technology is a little bit slow there. Councillor Barrett, please.
Thank you, Councillor Rebeck. I have two questions. Actually, I've just realised one of them might be what Councillor Shires was talking about in the end of the previous, but it is page 232, staying on rates. Just my first question is what's being done to tackle this widening gap between the children who are staying on at S4 and S5, and also on page 236, is there an explanation for the huge jump in exclusions? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. David McCluskey, please.
Yeah, so in terms of staying on rates, we experienced in session 2021 a bit of a peak in our S4 to S5 staying on rates, which I think was attributed to some of the effects of the pandemic around about that time and the uncertainty that young people were facing. So by the time we got to 21 to 22, the staying on rates had dipped somewhat, and of course that element of deprivation exists within that, and it remains a clear focus for us within the local authority, and that's obviously what you're asking me here. So what we're doing about it, we're encouraging every one of our schools and providing them with the tools to expand their non-national 5 and non-higher level 5 and level 6 courses, in other words, to broaden their curricular choice for all young people to provide more incentive for them to stay on in school. And we're also looking at the schools college partnership. We've just recently completed a service redesign event with them to ensure that their learner pathways are coherent, to once again allow young people to stay on within their secondary school estate but engage in courses that the schools college partnership are able to offer that we're not able to offer within individual schools. So I guess that's the first side of that question, which is round about the staying on rates. The second part of the questions, which I think was round about exclusion, what I would say about that is that exclusion as measured in 2021 was a little bit anomalous because it was low as a result of the fact that there was school closure at that point, or it was one of the reasons why it was particularly low is because of COVID measures. So although that increased in session 21-22, as a result of a full academic year, it still remained lower than our pre-COVID years and supports an overall reducing trend. But it doesn't negate the fact that we recognise that this is a very important part of our improvement actions and methodology moving ahead in terms of building the resilience and health and well-being of young people within schools and ensuring that schools are equipped with the framework and tools that they need to support all young people within their. So we maintain that as part of our kind of key improvement action moving ahead to ensure that that long-term trend of diminishing exclusions continues over the full period.
Thank you, David. Okay, Councillor Barrett.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Convener. You'll have gathered that I got muddled up with my paper 9 and my paper 10. And thank you for the answer to the question that Councillor Barrett much more eloquently put. My question is a more general one about the use of data, and we're seeing more and more sophisticated data coming through now, and Paul Davison and Adrian and their team do a really good job, and I know Sheena will appreciate this, that Barbara Vaughan would be very impressed with the quality of the data that we now have in front of us. It's moved on quite a long way from the pie charts of old. When this data is all then gathered and then goes on to presumably Scottish Government for number crunching, etc., to put the bigger picture together, how is that then used to inform sort of wider educational strategies and, you know, linking into looking at you know, the wider national curriculum offer, etc.? Are there discussions that you're part of about how, as a nation, we're going to use this data that local authorities are gathering to really tackle some of the stubborn barriers to particularly in the areas like literacy and numeracy, etc. And just a comment that I thought the case studies through the report were really useful and helpful.
Sheila, please.
The very short answer to the question is that yes, the data, when aggregated at a national level, does indeed help inform future policy direction and also areas for development and support. And I can give you 2 examples of that if that's helpful. I think about a year, 18 months ago, there was a national drive around numeracy, and a specific numeracy group, national numeracy group, was established, and that was co-chaired by colleagues from the Association of Directors of Education Scotland, along with colleagues from Education Scotland, and there has been some really targeted work emanated from that. And what we know is that pending is the same kind of approach, but around literacy. And so again, there'll be a colleague from the Association of Directors of Education Scotland asked to co-chair that with colleagues from Education Scotland, and that is about a national response to areas of development. But it's also important that we use all of that locally, and I think that that also marks a continuing improving trend in terms of our ability to use the much more sophisticated data that we can cut and dice in a lot of different ways to help then not just understand what our position of the recent past was, but actually plan for the future. And that's really important for us to be doing that locally as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Councillor Leishman.
Thank you, Convener. The report says that school attendance remains a focus for further sustained improvement. Do we know how many children became disengaged with school to the point they stopped attending, and do we know how many children are being educated at home?
Sharon, maybe, please.
Thank you, Convener. Councillor Leishman, we do. We know all of that data. So it's broken down into children and young people who have had issues with attendance, particularly post-lockdown and COVID, where we understood that the at-home learning actually was something that suited some of our young people, particularly those with additional support needs. But we also had young people who were out of their routines, and it has been a national challenge actually to make sure that our young people get back into school on time, 5 days a week, and visiting all their classes. So we have a range of approaches to deal with absence, and that is about making sure that young people understand the routines of school and making sure that they're in place. We put in additional staffing to make that happen, both in primary schools and secondary. We introduced new staffing called Community Link Assistants, who've been working in primary to encourage attendance and work with families to make sure that young people who can attend school do, and they do it on a full-time basis. We have pupil care and welfare officers in secondary schools who do a similar role, and that important work with families is the first step towards that. Then there are a number of young people who have greater needs, usually additional support needs, who really do struggle to come back into school, and our educational psychology team have been putting in place a number of really good projects around what's called emotionally based absence, and that is a much more deep set anxiety around coming into school for some young people. We know the numbers of those young people, we track them. Our quality improvement officers get the data on a monthly basis and have conversations with schools to make sure that there's a plan in place to ensure that attendance is increased. It is a slow work of progress in some cases. And then we do have a number of young people who have always had the opportunity to be educated at home, and our current figure at this point stands at 79 young people who are educated at home.
Thanks very much. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leishman. If there are no more questions, I will move the report. We deliver education very well in Perth and Kinross, and have done for a long time, actually, not least during Councillor Shire's convenership. But as we've said many times previously, there's always room for improvement and no room for complacency. But we do deliver education on the whole very well in Perth and Kinross, and I'm delighted to move this report.
I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Any comments on the report? Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Convener. I'd just like to echo your comments about the report, and that we always strive to do better and better. Just going back to the data, I think it is really useful, and it is so much more sophisticated now, but we recognise that behind that data are actual people, and I think that's probably one of the key strengths that we have in Perth and Kinross. Thank you.
You're here, Councillor Shires. Councillor Leishman.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, the educational attainment gap between pupils from the richest and poorest households is an ongoing issue. The gap starts in preschool and continues into primary and then into secondary schooling. And this gap for many gets wider as pupils go through their years in education. Education policies and practices encourage teachers and their senior management teams to make localised decisions that helps to address the educational attainment gap that negatively impacts children from more deprived backgrounds. There is good news. My own and Convener Rebick and Councillor Massey's ward, it's excellent to read that the case study in listening and talking at Tulloch Primary School was a success for learners in seeing a 5% increase in P4, a 7% increase in P7 and a whole school average increasing by 5%. And also for staff at Tulloch. Having teachers raise their confidence to teach and implement a fresh method of teaching to broaden their own skills and knowledge is also imperative in helping us close the gap. And as elected members, we have all been briefed that there are approximately 10,500 children in primary school and 8,000 in secondary school education. In Perth and Kinross, 5,155 children, that's around 1 in 4, are living in poverty, with around 12% of school pupils are classified as being among the 40% most deprived in Scotland using the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. The battle of helping to lift people out of poverty needs fought on many fronts: wages, employment opportunities, job security and education. I opened with commenting on the educational attainment gap being between the richest and poorest in our society, and this is going to continue being the biggest challenge we face. And I'm grateful to council officers for the reports and to all our teaching staff for their terrific efforts in addressing this dreadful problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leishman. You make a very appropriate comment about the attainment gap is stubborn and generational. It will take lots of effort and money to improve it. I believe we are making inroads to that, but it will be a long fight, and you're quite appropriate with that. I welcome quite appropriate comments about Tulloch Primary, which are spot on. You won't be surprised to hear me agreeing with you that they're replicated, I may say, across Perth and Kinross, and in particular in Goodlibin, Letham and Our Ladies, just for the purposes of equality. But thank you for your comment. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Convener. I just want to add my thanks to everybody for what's involved in pulling together this report and the work behind it right across the departments and schools, both to raise the overall attainment in Perth and Kinross, but especially to close the attainment gap between those who have a more privileged start and those who don't. And I'm really grateful to everybody who's working on that and committed to achieving that. And I do welcome the progress that we're making. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. If there are no more comments, can we agree the report? Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much for your positive engagement today across the chamber. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you for the officers who have given us some very comprehensive answers. Thank you.